Hello, I'm Adam Strauss. I'm one of the partners at Pekin Hardy Strauss Wealth Management. I'm here with my colleague, Ted Suling, who recently published a Navigator on the topic of when you're using a 401k at work, do you make contributions to a traditional 401k? Or if there's an option, do you make contributions to a Roth 401k? So we're going to talk a little bit about the differences of these two different vehicles, some of the pros and cons, and help people understand, perhaps what kind of strategy they should use if they have a choice between these two different types of 401ks. So glad you could join us here, Ted. I wonder if you could just start by just sort of explaining what is the difference? What is a 401k, first of all, but then also what is a traditional 401k, how does it work, and what is a Roth 401k, and how does it work?
Yeah, so just a brief overview on 401ks. It is an employee benefit for retirement savings. It's definitely growing in popularity. It's kind of replacing pensions. I mean, you'll see pensions here and there, but that's definitely kind of going by the wayside, and 401ks are coming in as a more popular option. And so that's, like I said, just a retirement savings plan. That's kind of the overview of it. As for traditional and Roth, those are the two types. Now, Roth isn't always offered, so you got to check with your employer first to see if that's an offering, and then go from there. As for what traditional is, it is a method to defer taxation on a portion of your income until retirement. And so with that, in a traditional, you're making your contributions with pre-tax dollars, whereas with a Roth, you are making your contribution with post-tax dollars, and that doesn't necessarily lower taxable income, but it's a different scenario. Like I said, traditional, you're deferring that taxation till later on in retirement, whereas Roth, you're paying it as is upfront.
Great. So if I could just make sure I understand what you're saying here. Let's say I have a 401k with my employer, and in the scenario where perhaps I put away $10,000 into my traditional 401k, in the year that I'm making that $10,000, that goes into the 401k, I don't get taxed on that $10,000. So that's a tax savings for me this year.
Correct.
But it doesn't go, the taxes eventually have to be paid. It's tax deferred. So it goes into the 401k. I grow it over time. When I'm retired, I'll start taking distributions on the amount of money in that 401k, and then I'll get taxed on the $10,000 plus whatever growth occurred in the account.
That is correct.
Right.
And that
so
is
that's the traditional
that is
401k.
taxed at ordinary income rates.
And it'll be taxed at the ordinary income tax rate. That's a good point. So with the Roth, in that same scenario, I'm putting $10,000 in this year. I'm not avoiding any taxes this year. I actually will get taxed, even though I'm making a contribution into the account. I will get taxed this year.
That is correct.
But then inside the Roth 401k, it'll grow. I won't have to pay any taxes on that growth. And then when I eventually take that money out in retirement, I don't have to pay any taxes on it because I paid taxes on it when it first went in. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So you got to pay the piper of the tax man. It's either
no matter what, you have to pay Uncle
You have
Sam.
to pay the piper. So with the traditional, I'm saying, okay, I'll pay the taxes when I retire. With the Roth 401k, I'm paying the taxes now so that I can avoid paying it down the line when I take distributions.
That is correct.
Okay, so how does somebody think about what are the pros and cons as you see it in terms of these different choices, and how do I know whether I should be making traditional 401k contributions or Roth 401k contributions?
Yeah, so everything's kind of a case by case, year by year scenario. There's not one set answer that you can give to everyone. So for traditional, some pros are it can lower your taxable income for the current year. And that's something that's extremely beneficial if you are a high income earner. It can lower your tax burden by the max contribution if under the age of 50 is $22,500, and over you get another $7,500 in there. So that's roughly $30,000 in taxable income that you can, so to say, quote unquote, write off. Some cons of the traditional, though, are taxes are hard to forecast and predict. Tax rates are always changing. So you don't really know exactly what tax rates might look like 20 years, 30 years, even 10 years down the line in retirement. So that creates kind of an unknown down the line with a traditional. As for Roth, you don't get that instant gratification of the lowering your taxable income. But as you said, in retirement or whenever you make a withdrawal, if it is qualified, you're not paying taxes on that. And that is money that you have then free of ordinary income tax. Some cons to that can be, though, if you are currently in a high income or high tax bracket and you are making a Roth contribution, you're going to pay high taxes on that money that you contribute. And if you're expecting to have a lower income, let's just use round numbers, say you're making $200,000 now and you're only expecting to take $100,000 in income in retirement, you're not necessarily going to want to make that Roth contribution because your taxable income is going to be lower later on. So those are some basic kind of pros and cons. Like I said, it's very situational, so you can dive deeper, but it all depends on the person and their current financial status.
So, but the basic rule of thumb is that you want to be taxed when you're in the lowest possible income tax bracket.
That is correct.
So if I know that I'm going to be in a lower income tax bracket now, then better to put it into the Roth, pay the taxes now, and then when my tax income bracket might be higher in retirement, that income at least will be tax free. Whereas if I'm in a high tax bracket now and I'm going to be low later, better to make a contribution to the traditional 401k and avoid taxes now and then pay the taxes later when I'm in a low income tax bracket. I think the problem with that is that nobody knows what their income is going to be in retirement, really. And
nobody knows what the tax rate is going to be.
And nobody knows what the tax brackets are going to be. I mean, I sort of have a bias that, given the sort of fiscal challenges that the US government has, that tax brackets are going to go up a lot. But also, I mean, you just don't know, and tax laws can change, and it's a very difficult thing to. It's not a difficult thing to forecast. Nobody knows. I mean, you can say, I'm sure that this is going to happen, but nobody really has a crystal ball. So, I mean, given that kind of uncertainty, what do you recommend as a general rule?
I mean, in the early stages of your career, you're probably not making as much money. So your income's lower, your tax rate's lower. That's really when you can take kind of advantage of Roths, so to say. Or if for whatever reason you think your income's going to be lower than it usually is or averages by a significant amount, or something that might change how you're going to be taxed in a certain year, that might be a year to take advantage of a Roth contribution as well. So usually early stages, or for whatever reason, if you're going to take a pay cut in a year or something like that from your employer, that might be another option.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned in your report is that it may make sense to use both accounts because it sort of diversifies your tax risk.
Mm-hmm.
If because the future is so uncertain, you don't know what your income is going to be in the future. I mean, maybe it makes sense when you're very early in your career. Totally agree with you. Put it in the Roth 401k. Yeah. But when you're late in your career, you're sort of mid-career, you're making more money. You're perhaps already in a high income tax bracket, but you're worried that the tax bracket's going to get even higher when you're in retirement. It seems to me, in that kind of circumstance, to just say, I don't know what's really going to happen, so I'm going to do a little bit of both. I'm going to put half of my retirement money into an IRA, half of my money into a Roth IRA. Tax rates go up, I'll be okay. Yeah. If my income goes down, I'll be okay. I mean, it's basically saying you don't really know what the future is, and so let's have a diversified tax strategy here with your 401k accounts.
Yeah, something to note on that though is just the limit is the limit. So it's an aggregate limit of the 22,500 under 50 or 30,000 at 50 plus. So if you're over 50 and you want to do 15 and 15, 20 and 10. That's, you got to remember that there is limits that are aggregate totals, those aren't separate limits.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay, good. Anything else that you want to share that we haven't already talked about?
I believe we kind of talked about how the contributions, there's actually one more thing, the employer match. So if you do go the Roth route and you have an employer match, your employer is not going to match that in a Roth account. That will be matched in a separate account as a traditional account. So that's one thing to think about too, because employer matches are very popular with these plans.
Should that influence whether you make contributions to traditional 401k or Roth 401k if you have an employer match?
That might. I mean, then again, it's like like we just talked about, diversifying everything. So if you want to make that diversification because you're uncertain, then I mean, either way, you're going to make the contributions to a traditional and Roth. So I mean, it might affect how much the amount you contribute to each one, but that's really how I see it.
Okay. All right, great. Well, this is all very useful and helpful, and I recommend to everyone who is listening to this video to read Ted's write-up on whether to use a traditional or Roth 401k. Thank you for joining me here, Ted, and for answering my questions. Appreciate it.
Yep. Have a good one.
Thank you.